All right, so today we're diving into one of the biggest questions out there, one that's kept people up at night for, well, forever. What exactly is consciousness? And we're going to tackle it by looking at the work of two incredible thinkers, an AI researcher who basically sees our mind as software, and a neuroscientist who's tried to define life itself with a single elegant equation. Let's get right into it. So, are we living in a dream? I mean, it's a question you've probably kicked around, right? But here's the thing, it's not just for philosophers anymore. Some of the top AI researchers and neuroscientists on the planet are taking this question seriously, and they're using some startling new tools to find an answer. And what they're discovering suggests there's something truly profound happening just beneath the surface of what we call reality. And that brings us to this really radical idea from AI researcher Joscha Bach. This quote gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. He and a lot of other brilliant minds in this space are using the language of computers, of software, to map out the mind. And you know what? What they're finding is totally upending our ideas about who we are and the world we live in. Okay, so first up, let's meet the architect, Joscha Bach. His view of consciousness is one of the most complete computational theories out there. For him, it all comes down to one core idea. Our minds are running on some unbelievably sophisticated software. So what's the big idea here? Get this. Bach's whole thing is that you are not in the world is in you. Your brain is working around the clock, generating this incredible virtual simulation just to make sense of all the chaotic stuff coming in through your senses. We are, for all intents and purposes, characters in a story that our own brain is writing as we go. And believe me, this simulation idea goes deep. Bach calls the brain a multimedia novelist. That world you see out there, that's just your brain's best story to explain the patterns of light hitting your retinas. And here's the really wild part. He argues that the physical world, atoms and molecules, can't feel anything. Feelings, emotions, your entire experience, those are all features of a simulation. Which means that you, the person you think of as me, is also a construction. You're a virtual avatar that your brain has modeled. Okay, so if we're in a simulation, how do we wake up inside of it? How do we become conscious? Bach says it's not magic, it's a mechanism. He calls it the attention loop. It's actually pretty simple. First, the system pays attention to something. But then, and this is the key, it turns its attention back on itself and notices that it's noticing. When that loop of self-reference gets fast enough and tight enough, boom, that's the feeling of being aware. It's a specific computational process. All right, so we've got the architect. Now let's bring in the mathematician, neuroscientist Karl Friston. He comes at this whole problem from a totally different direction, not software, but pure mathematics. But, as you're about to see, he ends up in a surprisingly similar place. Friston's big idea, and it's a huge one, is something called the free energy principle. Now, the math can get pretty intense, but the takeaway is just wow. It basically says that for anything to exist at all, I'm talking from a single cell all the way up to you, it has to constantly act in ways that prove it exists. It has to keep gathering evidence for its own existence. As he puts it, you are your own existence proof. So how does a thing prove it exists? Well, it's all about maintaining a boundary between itself and everything else in the universe. Friston has a name for this, a Markov blanket. The best way to picture it is to think of a drop of oil in a puddle of water. That oil drop only continues to be a drop because it's actively maintaining that boundary. That's it. That's the main job of any living thing, to maintain its own statistical boundary, to keep its inside separate from the outside. And this is where Friston's work gets really, really interesting, maybe even a little counterintuitive. Why did we evolve self-awareness? It wasn't for some deep philosophical reason. Nope. It was for a much more practical one, social coordination. See, if you live in a world with other beings who are also trying to maintain their own boundaries, you absolutely have to be able to tell the difference between my actions and your actions. The self, from this point of view, is just a tool we need to get along with each other. Okay, so on one hand, we have the architect who says our reality is basically a simulation running on the hardware of our brain. And on the other, we have the mathematician who says to exist is to constantly prove you exist. Two completely different starting points. So where's the overlap? Where do they connect? So what actually happens when you smash these two massive ideas together? When you take Bach's computational model of the mind and you lay it over Friston's mathematical model of existence? Well, what you get is a picture of reality that is just stunningly coherent. Okay, this slide right here, this is the payoff. This is where it all clicks. Look at this. On the left, you have the big concept.
And then you can see how both Bach and Friston talk about it, just using their own language. Bach says reality is a story the brain tells. Friston says it's self-evidencing through inference. Same idea. Bach says the self is a software state. Friston says it's a statistical boundary. They're even in sync about death. For Bach, the software stops running. For Friston, the boundary disappears. They are describing the exact same thing.
So what's the big takeaway here? The absolutely critical point is this. Both of these thinkers, coming from completely separate fields, land on the same conclusion. The self, that sense of I that you feel so deeply, it isn't some fundamental real thing. It's a functional tool. For Bach, it's a useful piece of software. For Friston, it's a model you need to navigate a social world. It's a tool, not your true essence. Okay, so this is all incredibly fascinating theory, right? But so what? What does it actually mean for you and me in our daily lives? Well, this isn't just an academic exercise. You can actually think of these ideas as technologies of consciousness, tools that you can use to literally upgrade your own experience of being alive. So the real question is, how do we take these powerful ideas from the architect and the mathematician and actually use them? How can you start working with your own consciousness in a more skillful way right now? So from our architect, Joscha Bach, we get this incredible tool, the technology of attention. If consciousness really is that self-referential loop, then you can train it. Start practicing meta-attention. Just notice what you're noticing. Check in with yourself more often. And once you really start to see yourself as a construction, a model, you realize it's not this fixed, permanent thing. And if it's just software, well, you can modify it. You can write an update. And then from our mathematician, Karl Friston, we get a different kind of practice. Think of it as the practice of self-evidencing. If your life is really about fulfilling the scripts you hold about yourself, then the most powerful thing you can do is get crystal clear on what those scripts are. What are the stories you're living by? Then go out and act in the world to test them. And, most importantly, be willing to update your beliefs about who you are when new evidence comes in. And what's just so mind-bending about all of this is where it's heading. You see, using the really rigorous language of mathematics and computer science, these scientists are arriving at the very same place that mystics and philosophers have been pointing to for centuries. They're reaching this profound realization that reality is not at all what it seems, and the self is not who we think it is. So I'll leave you with this. A final question, but it's a personal one. If your reality is a story that you're in, and your job is to live out a script, then maybe the most important question you can ever ask yourself is, what script are you choosing to fulfill?